Thank you, Ann. And thank you, Eagles. The flame of freedom burns bright in this room, and Lydia and I are so proud to be here today to stand shoulder to shoulder with you. The fight continues. The fight continues because our republic is under unrelenting attack, both internally and externally. And let's be clear about what's at stake. We could lose our country. We could lose our country because Joe Biden is not defending us, and American elites are not defending us from our enemies. And yes, we have enemies. And those enemies are the Russian Federation and the People's Republic of China. We'll get to Russia and China in just a few moments, but first, we do need some context. Today, the world is changing faster than our ability to understand it. And that means some of our assumptions are probably obsolete. And as a result, we do not comprehend the danger. It feels that we have just passed an historic transition, going from a period of general peace to one of constant turbulence. And in this new era, war can spread fast. And war can cause unimaginable devastation. Just on Wednesday, Vladimir Putin, while mobilizing Russian society, threatened to launch his nuclear weapons, out of desperation probably. But we got to remember the Chinese have also been making these nuke threats. We go back to July of last year when the Chinese threatened to incinerate Tokyo because of its expressed support for Taiwan. In September, they promised to go after Australia because it joined the AUKUS Pact with the United States and the UK. Periodically throughout this century, Chinese generals and officials have made unprovoked threats to destroy American cities. On March 10th of this year, the Chinese military promised the quote-unquote worst consequences for those who helped Taiwan. So what do Russia and China want with these threats? Well, Russia wants to annex neighbors to reconstitute the Russian Empire, and China wants to annex the world and the near parts of the solar system, as crazy as that sounds. Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, believes that Chinese rulers have the mandate of heaven to rule Tianxia, all under heaven. So, we are now facing two hostile powers, and of course, their territorial ambitions conflict, but in the here and now, they are working together. They are working together because they want to take down the United States, and they want to take down the international system. And of course, that is meaning they want to rule the world themselves. Now, China and Russia are working together very closely. I think that Beijing actually green-lighted the Ukraine invasion, something that was evident from their 5,300-word joint statement that was issued on February 4th after Putin visited Xi Jinping in Beijing on the day of the opening of the Olympics. We saw 3 Fridays ago, China's third-ranked leader was actually in Moscow talking to the State Duma, and in clear and explicit terms, he committed Beijing to support Russia. Xi Jinping, two Thursdays ago in Uzbekistan, actually reconfirmed China's commitment to Russia. But this is more than just rhetorical support. We have seen China, with its elevated commodity purchases, effectively finance Russia's war effort in Ukraine. China has opened up its financial system to Russian institutions that have been sanctioned by the West, the banks that have been cut off from the SWIFT system, for instance. Beijing has actually put its diplomats in service of the Kremlin. We know that Communist Party and central government propaganda outlets have been propagating Russian disinformation. So, for instance, Chinese-owned TikTok has been amplifying all of these propaganda narratives from Russia. And there is open source reporting that China has been supplying military information to Russia. This is location data. Because Ukraine has been operating Chinese-made drones, the Chinese know where the Ukrainian drone operators are. They give that information to Russia. Russia has been taking out the drone operators. Now, this war in Ukraine has had far-reaching consequences. We heard Derek. He talked about Larry Fink. On March 24th, in a letter to shareholders, BlackRock shareholders, Larry Fink wrote this, quote, "The Russian invasion of Ukraine has put an end to the 3 decades of globalization that we have experienced." What Fink was saying was that basically the Ukraine war killed globalization because globalization had already been weakened by COVID-19, which had lessened the connectivity among countries, among companies, among people. And Fink is not the only one talking about this new period, because we have Henry Kissinger and Joe Biden talk about the new world order, the totally new era. Everyone is thinking the world is indeed changed. At this moment, the world is on the stage, and it is deglobalizing. And we're starting to see this in the trade numbers, which is the most important metric of globalization. Moreover, we know that trade declines in downturns, and the world is heading into one. The United States has had 2 consecutive quarters of contraction of gross domestic product. That is, according to everybody but Joe Biden, a recession. And also, we have seen the COVID lockdowns in China and for other reasons have caused, in reality, a contraction in Chinese gross domestic product. But in China, it's not just a contraction of the economy. There's a debt crisis, a plunging currency, a worsening food shortages that we did hear from Mark, and also environmental disasters. And China is facing one other problem: the steepest demographic decline in history in the absence of war or disease. China will probably lose half its population in 45 years. It's now 1.41 billion. By the turn of the century, it probably will be somewhere around 500 million. In other words, no more than 70 million than the expected population of the United States. What is Xi Jinping's answer to all of this? Well, he's re-embracing Maoism. He's attacking domestic private entrepreneurs in China. He's attacking foreign companies. You have heard, perhaps, the rumors in the last 36 hours that there has been a coup in China, that the Chinese military has put Xi Jinping under house arrest. Those rumors are probably not true, but we do know that there have been abnormal military movements, and we know something is wrong. We just don't know what. But China's wealthy are reacting to this because they are beginning to flee. At one time, American elites thought that we should become more interdependent with the world, that we should become more reliant on the Communist Party. Now, obviously, as we have traded with the Chinese and the Russians, they haven't become benign. They've become more hostile and belligerent. And what we have seen, of course, is that they've become more a danger to the United States and to the rest of the world. So we obviously have to disengage from China and Russia. But we also got to acknowledge that disengagement will be perilous. But there's something else that we have to acknowledge, and that is every path going forward for the United States will be exceedingly dangerous. But the most dangerous option is to continue with policies that have created this disadvantageous situation in the first place. Just about everybody thinks, oh, we should trade with the Chinese because high levels of trade mean peace. But high levels of trade did not prevent England and Germany from going to war in 1914. Or Ukraine. Samuel Huntington, the late Harvard political scientist, in his landmark book, The Clash of Civilizations and the Remaking of World Order, actually said it's not the level of interdependence that matters, it's actually the direction. And he said that countries will remain at peace when they have a high level of trade, as long as they think that high level of trade will continue into the foreseeable future. When countries, Huntington said, when countries see that their interests diverge, then, quote, war is likely to result. That probably is somewhat of an exaggeration, but the point is that we know that when countries do see their interests diverge, that the threshold for the use of force will decline. We can now smell war in the era. We can smell war because Xi Jinping, of course, is involved in the biggest military buildup since the Second World War, but more ominously, we see that Xi Jinping is mobilizing the Chinese civilians for war. In July, a private Chinese entrepreneur making civilian products in the medical sector told me that Communist Party cadres had demanded that he switch his production lines in China to start making items for the military. He also said that other private entrepreneurs were receiving similar orders from the Communist Party, and that the Communist Party was now operating factories that once were privately owned because the owners did not want to stick around for Xi Jinping's war. We now have war in Eastern Europe. We could soon have war in East Asia. So what do? We must not buy Chinese products. We must not hold Chinese stocks. We must not, and this is what Derek said, we must not hold mutual funds that own Chinese stocks. We should support what's called COOL legislation, C-O-O-L, country of origin labeling, so that we know when we go onto websites where this stuff is coming from. And we certainly, as Mark said, should kick the Chinese out of our land, our farmland and our ranch land. And finally, of course, we should not support candidates that support communist China. There are a lot of things we need to do, and this will be hard, but yes, we can do it because we are Americans. We are Americans. We stand our ground. We do not yield. We are the world's last line of defense. This fight continues, and thank you so much, Eagles, for being in this fight.
Well, could you address Taiwan and all of that?
Anne asked me to address Taiwan. As you know, Taiwan is an island off of mainland China. It is self-governing. It is a people that basically do not believe themselves to be Chinese. Self-identification surveys show that 85% of them believe themselves to be Taiwanese only. On the population, maybe 3 or 4% believe themselves to be Chinese only. Beijing demands that Taiwan become a part of the People's Republic. And it does so for many reasons, but one of them is that Taiwan proves that Chinese communism is a lie. It proves that Chinese communism is a lie because here you have people who are governing themselves. Now, China believes that people in Taiwan are Chinese, and so this is basically undercuts every single narrative that the Communist Party makes, that it must be in place in order to rule the Chinese. So we have seen very hostile Chinese actions to try to pressure Taiwan to surrender, to become part of the People's Republic. This has some very dangerous consequences. We have these intercepts of Allied aircraft, of Taiwan aircraft by the Chinese. We have to worry that one of those intercepts will go terribly wrong and there will be war. And we have to worry about one other thing. The Chinese say that we Americans the Biden administration no longer deters them. They saw the catastrophic debacle, the failure in Afghanistan. They saw that Vladimir Putin realized what was going on and was not deterred by the United States. So Putin on February 24th invaded Ukraine, even though the United States, European Union, and Great Britain, which is the coalition allied against Russia, we had an economy, and that was 25.1 times larger than Russia's in 2021, and yet Putin still was not afraid. They have seen the failure, the complete failure of deterrence. And the Chinese probably believe that the United States will not defend Taiwan, so they can do what they want. And that means when you have war in East Eastern Europe. You have war in East Asia. That looks like the beginnings of World War III. Remember, World War II didn't start on September 1st, 1939, when Germany invaded Poland. It started over a series of aggressive acts by the Italians in Ethiopia, by the Japanese in China, and what you had was a general deterioration of world order, and that led the Germans to think that they could invade Poland. That's exactly what's happening right now. We've got so many problems. You got Ukraine, we have Azerbaijan and Armenia, we have Turkey threatening to seize islands from Greece, and we have all the problems of China in India, Japan, Philippines, and Taiwan. This is an exceedingly dangerous world. We have an administration, and we have senior leaders in the Pentagon, not only Lloyd Austin, but generals and admirals who do not appreciate the severity and the urgency of the situation. We are at risk, which means that on November 8th, we've got to take our country back. We've got to take it back from Biden. We've got to take it back from the globalists, because it is our safety and our security for ourselves, our children and grandchildren.